My name is Matt Valley, and welcome to the Rock and Roll Research Podcast, where we share the super cool backstories and side gigs of the research and insights pros that you trust. I'm super excited for the first episode of 2023, which is episode 82 overall. But I'm even more excited to chat with today's guest. So, Jonathan Rudick is Director of Customer Insights for Financial Services at the mighty Walmart, where he's been for the past 7 or so years, right? Prior to Walmart, he held insights and analytics roles at Capital One and HSBC after starting his career in consulting. So one thing we already know about you is go big or go home, right? Walmart, Capital One, HSBC, biggest of the big. Now, if you've ever been on a Zoom call with Jonathan, you've probably seen a handful of guitars in the background. And that's definitely something that piques my interest. And sometimes when that happens, in this case, it was Andrew Zuda from Mark Vision. He reached out to me and said, "Hey, Jonathan, I know he plays guitar and he's probably got a good story." So very excited to dig into that and more on today's podcast. So welcome to the show, Jonathan.
Thank you. It's great being here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Super excited to have you. So I'm really interested in your story about how you got into insights, because it's a little bit broader than just a career choice, right? So you didn't grow up in the U.S. So why don't you take us back and share your journey?
Well, okay. So I actually landed up living in the United States almost by accident. I grew up in South Africa, was educated there, had gone to school. I did a dual major in psychology and economics, then went and did some basically a master's in psychology, and then I went to business school, get an MBA. I was trying to stay out of the military at the time because it was conscription. Didn't work. I still got conscripted, still spent 2 years in the military, unfortunately. 6 days after I got out, I remember getting on an airplane. I was going to go to the UK. I had in mind to do a doctorate in economics in London, and so I got there, and it was June, just like late June. 6 days after I got out of the military, I closed the window on the airplane, and I have never been back, to be honest with you.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it wasn't a pleasant 2 years, but when I got to London, I discovered that my courses weren't going to be for another 3 months, and I'd never been to the States, and I decided to go to the States. At that time, young guy, Los Angeles, I thought I discovered heaven, and I just started jamming with different people, and I was just having a ball. And then somebody offered me a job, and the job was actually in research. Basically facilitating some focus groups. So that time we were looking at the placement of the ashtray in the Chrysler New Yorker.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So I did that for a while, and that got me my H1, and I planned to stay here just for a year and just try it out. My father said to me, "It's time that I started earning my own money anyway, and stop trying to be a musician." And so, become responsible and stop studying. So I thought I'd give it a try for a year. A year became 2 years, and then, I met my wife. We got married, and we're still here. I'm still waiting to figure out the right opportunity to move, right, and do the PhD, which is never going to happen. So that's how that was my first taste of research. Obviously coming from a psychology background, experimentation and writing theses and things like that was all part of it. So it was kind of almost a natural slide into it, and it was a way to get an H1 visa. But then I once got that, and I moved into other arenas and started looking at finances, got involved in consulting and some startups. Lost my shirt once, almost lost it twice.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So it wasn't just
Fortunately, I got out just with my shirt on, so that was good.
So you were putting up the money too for that, huh?
Yeah, well, it, if you don't pay for it, you don't get an education.
Yeah.
Um, so,
Yeah.
there was that part. It was fun. It was a lot of fun. It was really hard and really nerve-wracking for my wife, but we did that.
Yeah.
And then, strangely, so coming from South Africa, the sports there, the two passions I have in sporting is like cricket and rugby. And
Right.
one Sunday, I decided to do a pickup game of rugby, and I was like you know, way too old and too unfit to be doing it. And Landed up really injuring my back. And
Oh,
so I was basically, you know, flat for about 6 weeks, and I was really unable to do any traveling or anything for quite a while. And so I started looking around, and at that time, somebody was looking for a research manager at HSBC Auto Finance in
okay.
San Diego. They were based in San Diego at the time. So I took the job because I wasn't that mobile at the time, and I thought it'd be great. It was like just 2 miles away from home. I did
Sure.
that, and then one thing leads to another, and a few years later, I'm in Chicago with HSBC, and then a number of years later, um, Capital One are purchasing HSBC's credit card and consumer lending division, and
Ah,
therefore
okay.
Capital One, and that wasn't the greatest experience, but it was fine, and then from there, I made my way to Walmart to try something different.
Sure.
They need somebody to help with payments, and so I did that for about 3 weeks, and then they had me doing like a whole bunch of other things, which was cool because I hadn't really gotten into a lot of the other sides of the business.
Yeah.
So I was doing things like running the incentive program for store managers for customer experience,
Oh,
and
okay. Yeah.
build the models and manage that program, which is really it, it's an interesting task. But started applying a lot of my economic modeling stuff. It was fun. It was just doing that. But it was good to get out of it too because it's so process driven.
Right.
It can
Yep.
be once you've built the models, then the brain stops working and all you're doing is managing to-do lists, you know,
Right.
um, which is not my forte. Um,
Yeah.
but
I've worked on some big NPS projects myself, and I know exactly what you're saying.
yeah, but I got to do some cool stuff. I got to do a lot of modeling with mixed structures, so a lot of text, breaking that down, bringing the text into models, and it was really creative. Um, and at the time, not a lot was being done. A lot was being talked about, but not a lot was being done with mixed structure modeling. Um,
Right.
so learned quite a few things, specifically about pricing and other elements. And then about a year and a half ago, um, the financial services business was restructured, and they were looking for someone to run insights. And I was about the only person in the organization, in the insights organization, that had any idea about financial services.
Right.
So it's cool. It's kind of coming home in a way. It's
Yeah.
nice. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. It's interesting how it started with a real spark of serendipity in Los Angeles, but it was such a natural fit based on what you had studied all along.
Yeah.
So yeah, so it actually feels pretty conventional, once you actually got into the space. So interesting. So you already alluded to music, and it sounds like you started playing long before you got to the US. So tell us about your interest in guitar or other instruments, or where that came from, and what you're doing now.
So I guess the real inspiration for music, my mother was trained as a concert pianist. And I
Oh,
remember
wow.
as a kid, I would lie underneath the piano when she was playing, and she loved Beethoven and Chopin. She loved to play those all the time. And that's beautiful, And the best place to hear the piano is underneath the piano, lying on the floor.
Yeah.
And it was gorgeous. And then my sister, who's quite a bit older than me, she was into lots of music. Some of it I didn't like, but some of it I really like. She started playing some Hendrix and Led Zeppelin and stuff like that. And
Yeah.
really just, it just sparked the imagination. And so I said to my mother, I want to learn to play the guitar, but I want to learn the electric guitar. And she said, yeah, that's fine. I'll get you one. But first you need to study guitar for a year the right way. And then I'll get you an
Right.
electric guitar. So I did things the right way for a year, and then I got my guitar. So, um, and then from there, I guess, I mean, I really came of age with the punk movement, like,
Yes. Yes. All right.
uh,
So tell me more about that.
well, I mean, it's like living in South Africa is kind of like at that time, it was like living on another planet in a way. It was isolated politically, it was isolated geographically. You were just hours away from everything, right?
Sure.
Days away from everything. But when the punk movement took, because there was such a connection between South Africa and England, a lot of the cultural elements, a lot of the sort of the humor in South Africa is very English. It's very dry, and it's good. What can I say?
Right.
So so there was this affinity, and a lot of this music started permeating, more particularly in the underground. And because it was so anti-establishment,
Hmm.
given the kind of very conservative um, background we were living in, it was
Right.
just a natural fit for anybody who had a
Yeah.
spark of something in them, right? And so
Yeah.
it was just everything that the Sex Pistols did, everything that the Ramones did,
Yeah.
it just it just spoke in ways that no other music did at that time.
Yeah.
Uh, because it was just everything was just a big fuck you to everyone, right? And it
Hmm.
was just the way that you felt at the time, especially when you're like a 13, 14-year-old boy, right? There's like
Yeah.
nothing you want to do more than that. And so and the thing about punk is that the songs are easy to play. You just got to play them fast, right?
Right.
Um, but then I started listening to some of the other, like Patti Smith, and she came
Mhm.
out with 2 albums, Ethiopia and Horses. I mean, those are 2 incredible albums, and I just
Yeah.
love what you started doing with the guitar work. And then, of course, in the background in South Africa, I grew up in a small town, and there was all of this music that was just organic, right? It was like I would go on Sundays. We'd walk down to a river nearby us, and the local tribesmen would have their church services at the riverside, and they would do all this a cappella stuff that was just amazing,
Wow.
and so we'd listen to that, and one of these things just sort of swirl around, and then you know we just started. I don't know. I just got together with some friends, and we just started playing, and these things just creep in, and
Yeah.
and 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 then it creates its own energy, I guess. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. Some combination of the times and the
yeah,
culture and just the sounds that you experience in your day-to-day life. That's really cool.
yeah,
So you said that when you moved to LA, you started playing with
yeah.
some guys that maybe, yeah. Tell us about that.
So I brought my guitars with me, and a couple of them anyway. And then I just met up with a couple of guys. One, I was at the Whiskey one night, and
Yeah.
I met up with this guy who was into Christian rock. And now I'm not Christian. I'm a Jewish guy, right? So, but we just started talking, and he was just going through his influences and all the rest. And he said, "All right, what? When we get together." And so I go from Whiskey. I'm saying I don't have any responsibilities, and off we go at 3 o'clock in the morning, and we just start jamming in West LA, and we just started making music, and it was really cool recording. We didn't go anywhere with it,
Right.
but there was always some little gig, some little thing,
Yeah.
that was going on. It was and is really, really difficult to get into the music business. Um,
Yes.
but but I found that I was doing, little recordings as favors for people. And so was spending a lot of time doing bass work or guitar work to help out. various friends and getting paid very little for it, but I
Yeah.
got a lot of studio hours, I suppose, and so that was good,
Yeah.
and was helpful. Um,
Yeah. Cool.
and then once I had a family, so that kind of stopped for a while. But when I moved to Chicago with HSBC, I met up with a couple of musicians and we formed a band, um, and we did a number of gigs and recordings. It was fun. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Super cool. And you still play to this day, right?
Yeah, so nowadays I have a little studio at home. I write my own songs. So that's the one thing is whenever I've been involved in any group, it has to have been all originals. I never did covers.
Yeah.
Um, right. Not never, but a couple of times I did some favors for friends. We did, their weddings or whatever it was.
Sure.
But other than that, no cover band, just originals. And still do that. And now I just write basically for myself and do my own overlays and program my own drumming, and
Yeah.
it's fun. It's relaxing and it's creative.
Yeah. That's super fun. That's super fun. So, uh, what's always interesting to me is, you've had a very good and successful career in insights, which takes a lot of time and energy and passion. But at the same time, you've got this parallel interest and always have around creating music and playing music. So I'm curious to know from your perspective if there's anything that you've learned from, let's say, music that you've applied to your professional career or vice versa.
That's a great question. It's a few things. I mean, I think the one thing about music, and particularly when you get involved in doing a lot of jamming, doing a lot playing jazz in particular. So I played with a couple of jazz bands for a while, and just learning to improvise, to
Yeah,
take the risk, right? Do something strange and weird. And sometimes it's awful and sometimes it's amazing,
yeah,
right? But you learn to feel when it's going to be right. Um, that feel, that kind of willingness to experiment and not stay completely molded to a procedure or a process, um, or a formula,
hmm,
um, is probably I love to experiment with research. To me, research is really creative. I know
yeah,
it's counterintuitive to a lot of people because it's really formulaic in many ways, but it's not, because you're really looking at a big issue that has so many dimensions to it. Research can only address very particular elements of things,
right,
uh, and slotting everything into the bigger picture, or the gestalt, as it used to be called, right?
yeah,
Uh, is uh, is where the trick is, where the art is. So
yeah,
yeah, learning from music to do that.
yeah, yeah. I totally agree with that. So that's the whole purpose of research, right? Is to learning for a purpose. Sometimes you don't learn what you expect to learn, but you're always going to find something, right?
Those are actually the best experiences, right? And it's like the failed experiments or the experiments that take you somewhere completely unexpected are
Yes.
really the ones that are the most interesting, because usually the others are just intuition checks, gut checks, so to speak. And
Yes.
there's nothing terribly satisfying about that, right? You
Yeah.
get interest about that. And
Absolutely. I have two studies in my head right now that I think of when I think of that whole idea. It's like we didn't learn what we intended to learn, but we learned so much about maybe the extent of what's possible here, or about some, and maybe it's because we dwell on it for so long afterward. We look at it
yeah,
from every single possible angle or facet. Um, and you just spend a lot of time on it, tilling the soil, I guess.
yeah. But when you find that, I had an experience, I don't know, it was about 6, 7 months ago, where I came back to the team that I was working with, and I said, the way we've been thinking about what it was we were thinking about was like completely wrong, and this is actually how it works, and so we had to rethink everything.
Yeah.
Now, I think a lot of people don't like to deal with that change, and even those that do are thinking, well, I've got these budgets and I've already got these commitments, right?
Yeah.
And if we're blowing everything up right now, what's that going to do? But even for them, it turned out better, but I think it it's it does make people really anxious.
Yeah. True that. True that for sure. So, when you said that, just thinking about the fact that you've been at Walmart for 7 years or working in financial services for as long as you have, I just think about how much has changed in that time. Um, so I'm interested to know from your perspective as you then think not about the past but the future. What do you see as becoming maybe more important, or what does the future look like from your perspective in insights?
So it's actually interesting because a couple of months ago, I started watching this series on Prime Video, um, The Peripheral. It's based on a book by William Gibson. I don't know if you've ever read William Gibson.
I
Uh,
haven't.
if you ever get the chance, you should read him because he's a phenomenal writer and just a brilliant futurist in a way. What's interesting about The Peripheral is that it's science fiction, but they start talking about being able to integrate things like haptics and communication into your physiology, right? I don't know if you've ever read any of the books by Yuval Harari, Sapiens, for example. He talks about augmentation of the body's
Ye-
biology and things like that.
yes, I'm familiar with it. Yep.
So as I've watched the change in behavior over the years, we still do the same things, right? We still deposit money, we still raise credit, we still spend on our credit money, we still go shopping. We shop online, it's true, but we now rely on tools to do a lot of things that we
Mm,
never did before. So the way we interact, so there is a new interface, right? To everything that we did before, we do a little bit differently, and we do it with this interface. And these interfaces will take on more and more prominent role, and they will differentiate our experience, and they will differentiate us as individuals by what we choose to incorporate. Um, and whether it's something external or perhaps one day even integrated. I mean, who knows what's available there, but that that has caused a tremendous change.
mhm.
uh, it's segmented the population in ways that we never would have predicted, or at least I don't think so, back then. And it has shortened the feedback loop, but it
Mm,
has also short-circuited a lot of the decision nodes that we go through. So we tend to get really lazy and when we're looking at things, and we rely on things we've come to rely on because it's easy and convenient rather than it's true, right? Or whatever it is. Um, and that shows up a lot in the research. Has huge consequences for brand, but I think from a research point of view, just the accessibility will change and keep changing. I don't
mm,
think we're going to be looking so much at asking people what their opinion is, but much more testing it in the field because
yeah.
we can note the behavior, um, and so we'll get a lot crisper about that. Um, but I think we'll understand people less and understand their behavior more. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, that's really interesting. Um, yeah, a really interesting way to put it. You use the term interfaces, right? It's almost like there are all these traditional things that we do and we've always done, and we've always done them direct, right? It's almost like we've created this, like you said, interface
Mhm.
that's an intermediary in between us and the actual experience. And want to think about that a little bit more. It's kind of an interesting idea.
Yeah.
So
Well, I
cool.
mean, I noticed it myself. I mean, I grew up without cell phones,
Yeah.
as many of us people did. Um, but I am totally dependent on it now.
Yeah,
I actually feel like NCA and it's like leaving a watch at home, right?
yeah,
And you don't know where you are, you don't know what the time is. It's like it actually has a visceral impact.
yeah,
To,
it does. Yeah, crazy. It's crazy. When I find myself telling my kids about my childhood, and it blows my mind to even think about the things we didn't have access to, the ways we used to do things. It's almost mind-boggling.
and I'm sure they're just as interested in that as my kids are in my when I tell them the same thing.
Yeah, that's right. I think my daughter's eyes are permanently uh, bruised from constant eye rolls when I go into those stories. All right. Um, so yeah, this is interesting. So you have a unique perspective on a lot of this. So I'm curious to know what media you turn to for, you know, either inspiration or insight or maybe even enjoyment.
So I guess I'm one of those few people that still read books, right?
Yeah,
And so I love to read, and I used to like reading, the real literature stuff, but as I've gotten older, and my son in particular introduced me to science fiction, and I've become like mad about it. So
yeah,
there's just such brilliant stuff out there, and so I'm consuming a lot of that. Um, and from a nonfiction point of view, um, I used to be a news junkie. I'm not anymore. Much more of I don't know, an opinion junkie, but I like to make sure that I get a sprinkling of different opinions.
sure.
Uh, um, so um, there are a few different sites that I look at. Um, but that's become so controversial now. You can't even talk about who you read
Yeah,
because somebody's going to read something into it, right? That's going to be like, oh, you're that, right? So it's like,
yeah.
you're that kind of, you must support that political party or whatever it is. Frankly, I wish pox on both of them, to be honest with you. But
Yeah, yeah. Nowadays it's just purity tests everywhere you turn.
yeah,
So
and
yeah,
that is so constraining. It's horrible. It's like there's now been things you can't. There are now things you can't talk about. How do you do research? How do you think through hypotheses if things are off limits?
yeah,
Now, there are certain things that should be off limits. Financial services. I mean, the whole idea of redlining, for example. I don't know if you're
sure.
familiar with that,
Yep,
but I try not to use demographic variables in defining an offer. It shouldn't
sure.
be based
Yep,
on anything other than a need or a preference, right? Um, and so yeah, there it does make sense, but from a more, and I use this word in its broadest sense, from a more existential point of view, right? You really have to be able to contemplate a lot of things if you're going to try to arrive at some kind of truth,
sure.
uh, whatever that may be.
Yep, totally agree. Cool. All right. Well, when we talked before, I was struck by the fact that we started talking about music, and it's clear that your musical interests, the types of stuff you like to listen to, is very broad, right? And so this is what I really want to know, and I'm just fascinated to hear what your answer is to this. So, Jonathan, let's say you are stranded on a desert island, right? You've got 3 records at your disposal to keep you company for the rest of your days. What are those 3 records?
Ooh, just three.
Just 3.
That's
That's
crazy, man.
it.
um, Genres. I would want to have something classical,
Sure.
right? Um, I love Beethoven's piano concertos, the sonatas in particular.
Okay.
There's just something that just gets your gut and twists them, like listen to Pathetique or even the Moonlight Sonata, any of
Mm,
those things. It's profound music. Ah,
very nice.
now rock. Wow. This one's going to be a little different, I think. I mean, I would love to have my Zeppelin and all those things and Hendrix, and I'd love to say all those things. There was an album that was done a long time ago, maybe 35 years ago, 30 years ago. Robbie Robertson.
Rob
And
Robertson.
yeah, and this is called Robbie Robertson from the band, right? Who
From the band,
had
meaning the band? The
the
band?
band. Yeah,
Okay, got it. Got
right.
it.
And he had U2 on the album. He had Tony Levin playing bass. And it's such a varied collection of music
Hmm.
that I'd want to have that because there's some timeless pieces on there.
Yeah.
If I could throw in a couple of, you know, I'd rather you said to me what would be on my playlist if I could only have one playlist because
You can give me an honorable mention or two if you'd like,
okay.
but I
So
still have to hold you to three. But three plus honorable mentions if you like.
okay. So what other album would I take with me? I mean, I don't know if I'd have to choose between all these. So these could be it, or it could be the honorable mention.
Okay.
But certainly, U2's Joshua Tree album was just
Ah,
brilliant. I There is some African music that I really love. Um, I love the drumming of Mandukache.
oh
Uh,
yeah, yeah.
you
Very
know
nice.
that stuff that he did with Peter Gabriel. I
Yeah,
mean, he just completely redefined drumming for me. He just
yeah,
just it was just he turned drumming to me from from time and percussion into music in
yeah,
a I hadn't heard in a long time. Almost like Steve Gadd,
yeah,
uh, the same kind of sophistication of rhythm.
yeah. I like that. Manu Katché, legend, absolute legend.
Yeah. Um, I'd love to have something by Jeff Beck.
Hmm.
Uh, I mean, he's just an incredible guitarist. And what I love about him is that there is nothing technical about him, and everything is just it's it's it just seems to flow from him in ways that it's like there almost isn't a guitar. You know,
Yeah,
it, it's just Jeff Beck.
yeah,
I mean, I can hear his
extension.
playing a mile away. And
Yeah,
it's a Strat, and it's the same um, amplifiers as everybody else, but that sound is just nobody gets that.
yeah.
Um, who else would be there? I don't know. I mean, what who would you have on yours?
That's a pretty good list, Jonathan. And actually quite varied. So mine. See, I'm not the guest, right? So I don't have to
I
answer
know.
it. No, I change it up all the time, but I think last time I answered this was, and everybody has a cheat to this question, including myself. One I know I would pick is Tom Waits, The Early Years,
Oh,
volumes
good
1 and 2.
choice. Good choice.
I know that he personally has sort of denounced those records. They're before his gravelly voice, but what a storyteller! Just incredible. I'm quite particular to a record by Johnny Cash called "Mean as Hell," which wasn't one of his hit records at all, but he does a series of wagon train songs And to prepare for the record, he was living off the land for a period of time to get himself into the mindset. And so, in terms of records that can take you and put you in a place where you would never otherwise be in your head, you can actually feel what it's like then you know, uh, to be, living that lifestyle. And then honorable mention is going to be Slayer's Rain and Blood, because it's the best metal album of all time.
Okay.
But it's really short. So
So then you can have 2 albums.
So I'm going to pick a double album. I'm from St. Paul, Minnesota originally, and came of age in the 80s, which was, we had Prince and we had the Replacements and Husker Du and all of these great bands and musicians at the time. I'm going to choose Husker Du's double album called Zen Arcade on SST Records. So we got Tom Waits, we got Johnny Cash, Husker Du, and honorable mention Slayer.
That's a nice mix. That's right.
So that's what I
I
got.
would take is I would probably take either Radio Ethiopia or Horses from Patti Smith. Probably Horses.
Oh yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. Super cool. Well, I gotta tell you, Jonathan, this has been an awesome chat.
It's been fun.
And I would definitely love to do it again soon. I think there's a few different threads I'd love to dig deeper on for sure. So
it's been really great being asked questions that I find particularly interesting that nobody's ever asked me before. So I really appreciate it.
Hey, it's rock and roll, Jonathan. So awesome. Thanks so much. Let's talk soon and rock and roll.